First, on the use of excessive force. In 2012, our observation is that the authorities have increasingly rejected permit requests from opposition groups, and that riot police have often been used to disperse peaceful protests. In June, for example, riot police fired tear gas and shot sound grenades at close range to disperse a peaceful demonstration in Manama. One protester was seriously injured when struck in the head by a tear gas canister, which was fired from a distance of just a few meters. And in these protests, demonstrators threw rocks and Molotov cocktails, but the police were attacking the crowds indiscriminately, using tear gas, sound grenades, and pellet guns. We have noted that there is a decline of abuse in detention over 2012, but police are routinely beating protesters, in some cases severely, at the time of arrest and then during their transfer to police stations. According to opposition groups, at least 26 protesters and bystanders have died in protest-related injuries between November 1st, 2011 and November 1st, 2012, so over the last year. Many of these deaths have been attributed to the excessive use of tear gas. The government, for its part, has claimed that anti-government protesters have injured 1,500 policemen in 2012. Then to just move on to the prosecution of government critics and human rights defenders, we documented serious, systematic due process violations in trials of opposition leaders and activists before Bahrain's special military courts over the course of 2011. These violations included denying the right to counsel and the failure to investigate credible allegations of torture and ill treatment during interrogation. The BICI reached a similar conclusion, saying that around 300 people were convicted by military courts for the sole reason of exercising their rights to the freedom of expression and assembly. In spite of the promise by authorities to review these sentences handed down by military courts for speech crimes, and to void the convictions imposed after grossly unfair trials, protest leaders as well as many others remain behind bars. In August, authorities arrested rights activist Zainab El-Khawaji for allegedly tearing up a picture of the king and participating in illegal demonstrations, and she has been sentenced for 2 months imprisonment in September. And we've already heard about the case of Nabil Rajab, president of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. So I won't say more other than to say that he was sentenced for 3 years imprisonment for calling for and participating in peaceful demonstrations. And the verdicts in his case made no indication of any allegations of calling for participation in violence. So these were convictions for peaceful demonstrations without permits. And we've already heard about a subsequent conviction for tweets calling for the Prime Minister to step down. The Twitter conviction's been overturned, but he remained in prison pending appeal on the illegal assembly conviction. And then most recently, in November, the Interior Ministry has revoked the citizenship of 31 people, including opposition political activists, lawyers, and rights activists, accusing them of damaging the security of the state. And this has essentially rendered these people stateless. In the face of these continuing violations and the abuses that were documented in the BICI report, there has been no accountability for high-ranking officials. The BICI report concluded that the security forces had operated within a culture of impunity and concluded, and I'll just quote here, could not have happened without the knowledge of higher echelons of the command structure. The authorities claim that they investigated 122 officers for alleged torture and unlawful killings, but these few prosecutions involve mainly low-ranking officers, and many of them are non-Bahraini. In September, a criminal court sentenced a Bahraini police lieutenant to 7 years in prison for murder, but this is the highest-ranking security official known to have been convicted for abuses. Investigations have so far not included any high-ranking official at the Interior Ministry or the National Security Agency, and no official from the Bahrain Defense Forces is known to have been investigated, in spite of the fact that the military played the leading role in the 2011 campaign of repression. This is, of course, a record that must be reversed. We have urged the government to release Bahrain's imprisoned opposition leaders, to give the non-violent opposition space to protest peacefully, and to fully prosecute those responsible for serious abuses, regardless of position or rank. This is all necessary. To bring accountability, to check a culture of impunity, and to stop ongoing abuses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll take a few questions. I have some people have indicated they have questions. Okay, Raglan.
My first question is Leah, and that's there are actually two questions. The one is about civilian casualties so far since the uprising started, and then the other one is about the detainees, especially those of conscience. So far, we haven't seen any numbers or statistics released about exactly how many prisoners of conscience and detainees are held right now. The second question is regarding civilian casualties, again, since the uprising starts. Do you have any clear indicator, and maybe if you want to compare in terms of magnitude between Egypt, for example, which had a high number of casualties as well?
Okay.
That's kind of weird.
Good.
Let me put it back.
That's fine. To answer your first question, according to our knowledge, and it's a bit of a problem keeping up with numbers when it comes to Bahrain because there are arrests and releases almost on a daily basis in the country. And so it's very difficult for our team, specifically in the BCHR, to keep up with the numbers because of how fast they change every single day. But according to the estimation of speaking to lawyers, there's an estimated 1,800 political prisoners today in Bahrain. We estimate that there are around 85 people who have been killed since the beginning of the uprising in Bahrain. If I were to give you comparisons, just to show you the magnitude of how serious things are in Bahrain, Egypt has about, according to what I know, about 80 million people according to the population numbers. Some people say 90 million. But if you were to do a per capita comparison, Bahrain has about 600 to 700,000 people. 100 people in Bahrain killed would equal to more than 11,000 people killed in Egypt. Imagine that Bahrain had 50% almost of the population out on the streets. Imagine 40 million Egyptians out on the streets demanding democracy and human rights and change. This is something that happened in Bahrain, but because the numbers are far less, people tend to not give it as much importance. Now, if 100 people is more than 11,000 in Egypt, imagine how many more than 4,000 political prisoners, most of whom have been subjected to civil, psychological, physical, and sexual torture. How much would that account to if they're in the thousands? Thousands of people sacked. Again, if you did a comparison per capita, how many would that be? And that's, like I said, if 100 is just 100 is more than 11,000. So the magnitude and how widespread and how grave the crackdown in Bahrain is actually very, very serious, given the per capita numbers. But as a human rights defender, I always say that the loss of one life is one too many. Whether we're talking, I think it's depressing to see in a lot of situations people are turned into numbers. When we hear about Syria, about 100 people here, 100 people there, 200 people there, it's as if we're losing the whole humanity side or aspect of the situation. And I think it's always good to remember that each one of those numbers is a human being, and that's something that we need to constantly remind ourselves of.
Thank you, Mariam. I think you're right. Every life counts, but scale is also important. And the idea that 85 people killed in the last 2 years as a result of the violence by security forces, Egypt is a great comparison that would make. And that's 10,000 people for a country the population of Egypt, 9,000 people for a country the population of Italy or the UK. That's a quite sobering thought. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
I have you, Jassim. I have Damien first.
Yes, as a practicing doctor, I have great concerns about the medical
situation in the prisons in Bahrain. Perhaps the panel could comment about that. Specific examples, Hassan Musawi, Nabil Rajab, Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja. As a doctor, I'm hearing of their symptoms and they require urgent medical attention for conditions ranging from renal disease and stones to cervical radiculopathy and infected metal in jaws to cancer. And my impression is that they're not receiving appropriate medical attention. And is there something the international medical community can do to provide, say?
Thank you, Rami. I guess I'll give that to Dr. Nada.
Yes, exactly. The condition is really bad. What's worse is we're not aware of the severity of the situation, specifically in the case of Hassan Shayma and Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, because the families and the lawyers, they have no access to their medical records. But as far as we know, that Hassan Shayma, he was receiving treatment for cancer and he was cured according to his doctors in London. But again, he had a tumor. He was tested for tumor, but we don't know the result of it. We don't know whether it's benign or malignant. The authorities, they're delaying his medical tests, and they're not informed about the updates of his condition. He was taken 3 times to the military hospital. He received 3 unknown injections. What's the nature of these injections? Why he's giving these injections, we have no idea. Also, Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, we know that he's suffering chronic pain in his jaws and facial bones in his left arm. According to the doctor who did the operation at the military hospital, he said even if the 36 screws in the middle that's kept in the facial bones, even if it's taken out, the pain won't go. Absolutely, we have no access, not the family, to get to know the details of the conditions. But if doctors internationally they submit requests to look at the case, and probably by talking to the families, and probably to create more pressure to get to the bottom of their conditions. But it's very alarming. Also about the medical conditions in prison, we have detected, we have a report, you can refer to the violations behind bars, but the jail conditions are very bad, and I'll give just very brief examples. We have, Bahrain is a very, very hot country. It goes up to 50 degrees in the summer, which you can fry an egg. Those prisoners, there were no AC, the air conditioners, they were broken, they could die in such a very, very hot weather and climate. Also, there's no access for clean water, they suffer from infections, they're very poor hygiene in the jail facilities. Also, which as a previous prisoner I was arrested, I can confirm to you that they have just open access to addictive drugs. It's enough to write a paper to the guard and to get you unlimited amount of Valium or other pills, and they will immediately bring it to you. But on the other side, there is a very poor medical care. They won't be treated for any injuries, or as I mentioned in previous cases.
Thank you, that's very interesting. The idea that addictive drugs are freely available, medical care is not. I have no idea. I have Dr. Jasim, and then...
Well, my question is to Khalil with regards to the cases of dismissed people and Bahrainis from their jobs. The figure is that more than 4,000 people have been dismissed. I think around 600, yet to be reinstated. There have been reports about not getting their normal jobs, not getting back their normal jobs, and some are even denied the chance to be promoted. How is Bahrain coping with that? are like charitable societies helping? How is that affecting the day-to-day life of the dismissed ones?